Can you use old gaskets, O-rings and circlips? Let's get into this one. RevelatorAlf. Hello, welcome to RevelatorAlf. I hope you're all well. So this video is all about, well, do you actually really need to change your gasket? You know, let's say it's come up to 5,000 miles on a service change. Do you really need to change the O-rings on your drain plugs, let's say off your engine, your transmission, your primary? What about you've taken the clutch inspection cover off, the derby cover off, and you've got the gasket there? Do you need to replace that? Let's just say you there's a circlip somewhere on the bike, let's say on the forks, or I don't know, anywhere else that you find a circlip. Do you need to put a new one on? Well, the simple answer is no. Unless there are two issues involved. So the first thing is whether you're thinking about the future. If you're thinking about the future, so let's say you've got 5,000 miles, 10,000, 20,000 miles, let's say, on your bike right now, and it's still on the same gasket, then you say, well, actually, I want to protect this or future-proof it for the next 5,000, 10,000 miles, that kind of thing. So you could argue that actually, whilst the gasket that you're taking off, whilst the O-ring that you're taking off, the circlip, whatever it is still in good working condition, I want to try and hedge my bets a little bit. So let's say if I'm going for a long journey, that I'm going to put a brand new gasket on there or O-ring, so it'll be absolutely fine. So this is something you can think about future-proofing your bike. And I would certainly say this, so let's say if you're going to go for a long tour, you're going to go for a European tour, world tour, around Americas, whatever it is you're going to do for the summer months, let's say, and you think, right, okay, I want to have my bike in tip-top condition before I go. Or just buy your extra gaskets with you or your extra O-rings and keep them as spares on your bike, so if you do need to change them whilst out on the road, you've got them with you, okay? So don't necessarily feel that you need to change a gasket or an O-ring straight away, especially if it's in good condition, okay? Right, what are the chances of an O-ring or a gasket or a circlip, whatever, still being in good condition? Well, again, it really depends, but circlips, I would say yes, the chances are they're still going to be absolutely fine, unless they've been deformed in some way. And usually the reason why they've been deformed some way is that when somebody has worked on the bike before, they've tried to take out the circlip or they've tried to put it back in, they've deformed it or they've bent it in some way. So if you see that there's any kind of deformation on it, is that the right word? But you know what I mean. If it's warped in any way, then change it. Same with the gasket. If there's any kind of nicks, any kind of pinch marks on it, you can see there are any cracks on there. Again, you know, give it a really good inspection. But to say if there's any kind of wear on it, that I would say yes, future-proofing purposes, I would definitely change it. So don't necessarily change it just because it's time X, as kind of say, but you know, just change it on the inspection. However, there's nothing wrong with you changing it just because you've reached a certain time interval as well. It is only a, you know, a gasket as well. So when it's like a rubber gasket, I'm talking about here. Okay, O-rings. O-rings, let's say, that you might find on your oil dipstick, or let's say on the mag plugs on the engine oil, the sump, the transmission sump, and also the primary as well. Should you change them? Well, do you know what? This is one thing that I would say, do you know what, go ahead and change them, because I've never seen an O-ring that could not be changed on a drain plug. Now, I've got to say this, for years and years and years, whether it's cars or motorcycles, I would never change O-rings. I would never change, you know, pinch copper washers or anything like that. I would just take it out and put it back in. And if it started to leak, then I would go and get a new one. And that still holds true, I've got to say. But if you've got an O-ring, especially if you've torqued it up, when you've taken it off, sometimes you might have noticed there's extra peeling away from it. It might have pinched a little bit. Because they're so cheap, I would say go and get them. I would also say you can buy packs of O-rings, different size O-rings as well, just to keep in your workshop at home. As I say, there's no harm in just putting these in a little tool bag as well, just in case you had to change them on the side of the road, let's say, you know, whatever it is. But the chances are very, you know, very slight, I grant you. But as I say, they're so cheap, you might as well just change them anyway. Certainly at your oil changes, at your service intervals. As I say, these little O-rings for the drain plugs, as I say, this is off a dipstick, just change them as well. Not necessarily off the dipstick, but certainly off the drain plugs. But it's entirely up to you. You could still go on inspection. I know a lot of people would still say, oh, it's absolutely fine, I'm going to stick it on. But they don't really tell you whether they're in future, let's say a few months down the line, they're starting to get oil leaks as well. But as I say, again, it comes back down to that future proofing as well, and also the minimal cost. Just go ahead and change it. With something like this derby cover gasket, I would say, unless it's leaking, there's no real need to change it. If it's still in good condition, there's no signs of wear at all. But as I say, there's no problem, no harm in having a spare with you just in case. Okay, let's talk about other gaskets, let's say engine gaskets, primary gaskets on your bike. Well, those definitely need to be changed. If you're taking something off the bike that is mating two surfaces, the chances are that you're going to have to take off that gasket, and it may not come off in a good way, in an intact way. But also that gasket has been compressed as well, and once you've torqued everything back up. So to put an old gasket back on, you may be running the risk of, in a few miles or a few months or a couple of thousand miles, that's starting to leak again. So I would always say clean up your surfaces and go for a brand new gasket, and that's the whole point of having a service kit or a gasket kit for them. However, I've got to say, hand on heart again, I've put many bikes back together in the past with the same gasket as well, and it's been absolutely fine, no problem at all. You can get, gasket compound as well, sealing compound to help you with that as well. But as I say, as a preference, I would always say change the gasket for a brand new one. Again, the expense is usually a minimal expense. It's obviously a lot more expensive than O-rings, but I would say definitely do the gasket change. If you've taken off something, then you've had to take off an old gasket, put a fresh gasket back on, I would say. And of course, especially if it's been damaged in any way, and the chances are if you've taken off a component, let's say a cover of some kind, or you've had to split engine cases or take off the head or whatever it is, you really want to make sure that when you're putting everything back together, you're not introducing any risk of that part failing again. So that's, again, your kind of future proofing after work that you've done to your bike as well. So in that sense, definitely change the gasket as well. Certainly for a critical component on the bike. If it's something that's on the periphery, it's on the external of the bike, then you might get away with not replacing the gasket. So let's just say like a head gasket, I would definitely change. Engine cases, I would definitely change, that kind of thing. The same can be said for any seals, oil seals inside the bike, the transmission, from the clutch, let's say, all these kinds of things. They don't necessarily need to be changed, but let's say if you've opened up your bike that far and you've gone into heart surgery, let's say, well, as you're there, you may as well change those other components that may fail in 5 or 10,000 miles. So let's say you've taken off your clutch basket and you need to replace an oil seal or a bearing behind it or whatever it is, that that actually now that you've put new components in, and behind it, the oil seal or the bearing is absolutely brand new as well. So you're kind of, again, future-proofing. You're not necessarily going on what is inspection. But as I say, different thoughts on this. I would say if you're going to do major surgery on the bike, internals, I would try and optimize the longevity of that work as well by replacing oil seals and bearings and things like that as well. But again, a lot of this comes on the inspection as well and how it feels as well. So as I say, it's not a gospel here, but I would lean towards that way as well. Certainly for something more major, change those oil seals, change those gaskets for brand new. If it's something on the periphery, on the external of the bike, I would definitely say go more on inspection as well. And don't forget those peripheral, those external type gaskets as well can be repaired, or you can make your own gaskets as well. So, you know, bear that in mind, especially if you've got an older bike as well. Anyway, let us know in the comments below what you think of this. But as I say, it's open for debate, and there's, you know, some who would say religiously always change your gaskets for new. Some would say on inspection, and others would say, well, it really depends what gasket you're talking about. So I would go one further. I would say what kind of gasket you're talking about, what is the condition of it, and what other work are you doing on your bike, and also then what is the next time that you're going to be looking at that area or that gasket again. If you're saying that you don't want to look at that for another 10, 20, 30,000 miles, let's say, then I would take that opportunity to change that gasket or that O-ring or that seal there and then. Don't wait for it to fail in 5 or 10,000 miles and then you have to do all that open heart surgery again. However, if it's just a simple peripheral gasket, I would say, well, possibly more on inspection rather than because you've just opened up a casing or something like that. Anyway, let us know in the comments below. But don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell, like and share, and check out the website RevelatorAlf.com. And I'll catch you again. Ta-da!